Welcome all. I'm joined today by Dr. Laurence Broers, the Director of the Caucasus Program of Conciliation Resources and an Associate Fellow of Chatham House's Russia and Eurasia Program. So Dr. Broers, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
So you recently penned an article for Chatham House titled, "With Russia Distracted, Azerbaijan Escalates in Karabakh." Firstly, you describe this window of opportunity that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has created. Can you explain what you think Azerbaijan's strategy is?
Certainly. To understand Azerbaijan's strategy, I think we have to go back to the outcomes of the Second Karabakh War in 2020 and two particular legacies of that war for Azerbaijan. First of all, a vastly increased Russian footprint in the country in the form of the presence of the Russian peacekeeping mission in that part of Nagorno-Karabakh that was not recaptured by Azerbaijani forces. The second legacy is the risk of the stabilization of this still unresolved conflict and unresolved situation over the long term. So although I don't like the language of frozen conflict, there is a risk for Azerbaijan that this context, with its deeper Russian footprint, becomes stabilized and freezes over again into a long-term protracted conflict. I think Azerbaijan's strategy, what we've seen, particularly since May of last year, is addressing these risks and can be seen as quite rational in light of those risks. So first of all, Azerbaijan is seeking to compel Armenia to agree to a comprehensive peace agreement. In that sense, it is seeking to avoid the trap that Armenia fell into in the 1990s and early 2000s of not agreeing a comprehensive peace agreement when it had the upper hand, as it were. With that, Azerbaijan is also seeking to define what is in conflict exclusively at the interstate level. I mean, the Karabakh conflict, I think, I would argue, developed into a multi-layered conflict from the intercommunal level to the intrastate level between Karabakh and the state of Azerbaijan, the interstate level, and one could argue also the international level. And so what Azerbaijan, I think, is seeking to do is to define the terms of a comprehensive peace agreement exclusively in terms of the interstate level. And secondly, it is testing the Russian presence. In that article, I identify a number of events and processes that have been going on since the 24th of February. And I think this is aimed in various ways at testing the Russian peacekeeping mission and in a way demonstrating that it cannot fulfill its mission of providing security and thereby questioning its raison d'etre, the reason why Russian boots are on Azerbaijani soil.
And you state in the article that the Russian peacekeepers kind of stand in between the Armenian population and Azerbaijani forces. But you also make a very interesting point, which I feel often goes unnoticed, which is that the Russian peacekeeping contingent is lacking a defined mandate and rules of engagement. Can you explain exactly what that means?
Certainly. I mean, normally in global practice, one would see a peacekeeping mission deployed to a conflict zone, underpinned by an international mandate, whether that would be, well, usually through the United Nations, but there have also been civilian monitoring missions within the mandate of the OSCE. This particular peacekeeping mission was deployed through trilateral agreement between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. So it doesn't have that it's not underpinned by an international mandate. The absence of a mandate also means that the rules of engagement in case of violent incidents are not clear. And this, of course, becomes particularly relevant in the context of what we've seen 2-3 weeks ago around the village of Faruch, where it's not clear what the Russian rules of engagement should be in the face of challenge. And I think this points to, I would make a couple of points here. The peacekeeping mission was effectively deployed unilaterally by Russia. I think other countries have kind of gone along with this, given that there is no other country that is willing at present to put peacekeepers on the ground in this context. But I think it also points to the conditionality of the Russian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. You know, at the time of the end of the Second Karabakh War, there was a widespread narrative in the media that Russia had won this war. I don't agree with that, and I think what we see is a Russian peacekeeping deployment that is conditional on the agreement of Yerevan and Baku. It is not underpinned by an international mandate, and that means that its presence can become an object of negotiation on a longer menu of bilateral issues between each of the conflict parties and Russia. So I think this is a fragile peacekeeping mission. And I think we're seeing that in developments in the context.
And just before the launch of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Azerbaijan and Russia signed an agreement which reportedly was to raise relations to an allied level. In terms of the Russian peacekeepers and the conditionality which you mentioned, how do you think that agreement or the developing relationship between Azerbaijan and Russia has affected the actions or even non-actions of the Russian peacekeepers in Karabakh?
Well, as you point out, Emilia, this new alliance agreement was reached by Baku and Moscow, and I think this is actually a very characteristic feature of Azerbaijan's foreign policy. Azerbaijan avoids geopolitical bloc politics, and it has a range of different kinds of membership in a whole slew of different geopolitical organizations and geocultural organizations, ranging from its membership of the non-aligned movement, membership of the Organization for the Islamic Conference. It's still in Guam, the Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Moldova entity, which I believe is now headquartered in Azerbaijan. It's also a dialogue partner for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it's negotiating a strategic partnership with the EU. So in a sense, I think this agreement with Russia kind of falls into this kind of engagement. Obviously, there was also the Shusha Declaration, which was signed in June of last year. And I would see this agreement as basically a way to balance amongst different powers, a way to manage the relationship with Russia and avoid pressure for a more deeper integration into Russian-led security or regional economic organizations such as the Eurasian Economic Union. So I don't necessarily see a direct link between that agreement and the Russian peacekeeping mission. But as I was saying before, I think the success or failure, the perceived success or failure of the peacekeeping mission becomes one item on a spectrum of issues where Azerbaijan and Russia are negotiating, are agreeing trade-offs, one thing for another. And that, again, underlines the conditionality of this mission. So I think that also points to the fact that in the Russian-Azerbaijani relationship, there's actually leverage going both ways. If the Russian peacekeeping mission is seen to fail, then that would be a source of deep embarrassment and reputational damage for Russia.
And I also want to ask about France and the United States. Obviously, both are co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk Group, which we'll get to after. You mentioned in the article that both countries made rather rare statements by pinpointing Azerbaijan as the violator of the ceasefire this month, a few weeks ago. Do you think if Azerbaijan is attempting to take advantage or exploit the situation with regards to a weakened Russia and slowly take over Nagorno-Karabakh, would that get any more than words from the West, or do you think there would be a stronger reaction?
Well, here I'd highlight the fact that the Karabakh conflict, I think, has always been exceptional when you look at the wider spectrum of conflicts in Eurasia for a number of reasons. One of them being that unlike the conflicts in Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and particularly in Ukraine, the Karabakh conflict does not have a consolidating effect on Western opinion and perspective on the conflict. It actually has a corrosive effect. When you think about reactions to the Second Karabakh War in 2020, there were debates in each country in Europe about what stance to take. You also see two maybe outlying yet nevertheless significant members of the wider Western community of states participating directly or indirectly in that war, Israel and Turkey. And so, I think perhaps, one would look in vain for a consolidated, unified Western position. However, what we are seeing is that, you mentioned that the OSCE, and we'll come to that in a minute, as the OSCE and the Minsk Group process has receded in presence, we see the European Union stepping up. I think what we will see going forward is a continuing leveling and decline, potentially, of American interest as the EU increasingly assumes center stage. We've obviously seen the second meeting in Brussels this week, a statement regarding new agreements, and indeed agreement that the foreign ministers will now start to prepare a peace treaty. I know there are a lot of concerns in Armenia and in Nagorno-Karabakh regarding the wording and the tone of this statement, but I think the European Union is trying to tread very carefully, not to compete with or replace existing agreements and mechanisms. So I would hope that we will see continued European engagement, given that this is, after all, a conflict taking place in the Eastern Partnership countries and on the edge of Europe.
And finally, I want to ask about the OSCE Minsk Group, which is a body set up in the 90s to work towards a peaceful settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Very recently, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the United States and France, the two other co-chairs of the group, haven't been cooperating with Russia in this format. Recently, Jelena Porter, spokesperson of the State Department in Washington, avoided a reporter's question about the OSCE Minsk Group, and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has said that the OSCE Minsk Group format isn't producing results. So what do you think about the future of the OSCE Minsk Group? Does it have a future?
Yeah, that is a very difficult question to answer. The Minsk Group was completely marginalized during the time of the Second Karabakh War. There were reports of potential return to Minsk Group diplomacy in September of last year. That didn't happen. And I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine actually makes it even harder to imagine that France, the United States and Russia could work together. Historically, of course, if we look back through the history of the Minsk Group, we see that the Karabakh conflict was this exceptional space in Eurasia where the West and Russia were cooperating. Nevertheless, I think you could argue that for all of that symbolic cooperation, the actual peace dividend was very limited. There was a lowest common denominator of interest in preventing a large-scale war, but no real consensus on what a peace might look like. Now, the EU, as we were discussing, has stepped up. I think it is being very careful not to be seen to replace or challenge the OSCE. And I think the key issue here, it kind of comes back to the issue of mandates, because you had the Minsk Group mechanism, but you had the broader OSCE mandate to underpin an agreement. If Armenia and Azerbaijan had come to an agreement within the framework of the Minsk Group, that would have been underpinned by 3 members of the United Nations Security Council and have the weight of the OSCE behind it. If they come to a comprehensive peace agreement in the foreseeable future, who will be the guarantor? Who will underpin? What will be the mandate that would underpin that agreement? And this is ultimately in the interests of both parties. If they do come to an agreement that they can sign off on, they're going to want to have guarantors for that agreement. So I think, there are lots of issues with the mechanism, but the mandate remains, I think, very important, and we need to think very carefully before throwing out the baby with the bathwater in terms of what will underpin, what will be the guarantees for any agreements reached.
Okay, well, Dr. Broers, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Emilio.
And thank you for joining us, and continue following CivilNet.